Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of Working in UX Design. Today, we have a very special guest who's based in Kuala Lumpur. His name is Izwan Ismail, and he is a digital and design leader with over a decade of experience that encompasses startups, scale-ups, and corporations. Izwan builds and leads world-class designers and product managers, as well as engineers. He currently works at CIMB in the headquarters in Malaysia today. And he was previously known for founding VLT Labs, a venture builder that builds, launches, and invests in startups across Southeast Asia, Australia, and Europe. And his venture builder was actually successfully merged and acquired by McKinsey Company in 2017, right? So he was then serving McKinsey as an expert associate partner, where he led the digital labs practice in Southeast Asia, where he was delivering impact in the education sector, banking sector, insurance, energy, and oil and gas sectors. So we have someone here who's a very consummate and experienced design leader today, and I wish for him to share with more about his experiences, but also how he manages to communicate the impact of his work or the impact of his team's work as a design leader. Really glad to have you here today, Izwan.
Lovely to be here. Thank you, Dylan, for inviting me and everyone to kind of carve out your time in very different time zones. I'm very excited to share.
Awesome. And we have an international audience, live audience here today. Thank you all for joining us, and feel free to share your questions if you have any. So let me just start by asking you, you know, like if people were to ask you, are you more of a design leader? Are you more of like how would you describe yourself or your career to like people who don't know you very well?
That's a great question, to be honest. I haven't really thought about it that way, but I would kind of say that I'm a dreamer to some extent. Doing things where at first I get questioned a lot on like, what are you doing? Like what company you're starting? What is this design thing that you're doing? Are you doing posters? And so forth. And there's so many questions that comes out of it, especially from family. But I would also kind of like switch it around and say that I'm also a builder, right? Whereby I build amazing experiences and teams, and as well as companies to some extent, and kind of put the dreaming and the building together is somewhere in between there. That's why I operate.
Somewhere in between being a dreamer and a builder. I think that's an awesome combination. So you've been in McKinsey, right? Not a lot of designers have done stints in a business consulting firm, right? Do you mind sharing a little bit, like what did you pick up there as a designer or as a design leader? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There was quite an exciting switch from flip-flops to leather shoes, to say the least, right?
Sure.
I'm running a venture builder of 20 people, where we were kind of casual at all times, ideas were throwing around, and then joining to a company like McKinsey, where there's structure and there is some corporate mannerism to embrace, right? And by rightly so, because the companies that we were working with back then were Fortune 500s or century companies, and 100-year-old companies, or just gigantic behemoths, right? And that just requires you to kind of being able to communicate the dream things into something reality, you know, which is the building portion of it. And that requires me to kind of like switch the language as well, because it's not about just speaking design with flair, but it's design with weight of execution and impact to business. I think that was the biggest learning that I had working with McKinsey.
That's great. And do you mind elaborating, like you said, the weight of execution? Like, could you give like an example of, you know, what you observe like typical designers when they're presenting versus like after going through McKinsey, doing a ton of presentations like to business executives, how has that changed? Yeah.
Yeah, I think as designers, we're good in discussing ideas, right? We're good at unpacking thoughts to some extent. But when you're talking to business savvy folks or C-levels, they're like, I want you to unpack the levers of the business, right? So if I were to use design, what does it mean to my bottom line? Because at the end of it, bottom line matters, right? And the bottom line can be impact to society or impact to for stakeholders, right? Those are the bottom lines that they look at. And as designers, we love nitpicking on, the pixel perfect portions of things and talking about it and how important it is, or getting into the minute details of things, whereby the business side is like, great, that's nice, but what does it mean for my revenue? What does it mean for my productivity? What does it mean for my operational costs, and so forth. And I think that's the part where we as designers need to learn more on how best to bridge idea world, the dream world, with the execution world, and how it impacts business, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I think it makes perfect sense. And being a fellow entrepreneur myself, I can certainly relate to what you're saying. What would be your advice for someone who's just been to design school or has only worked in his or her entire career as a designer? Like how would you suggest that they start in the way that they communicate to business leaders? Like how should they change the way they communicate?
I think a couple of years back, I came across, I think whether it's a blog post or an article somewhere that says like designers do not save the world. Right? There's this whole design hero complex, right? But like, oh, whatever I do, it's going to save the world. It's a yes and no, right? Yes, you're going to save the world, but no, you're not leading the charge, right? You're part of the charge. You're part of this whole team setup that's going forth to change the world. And design plays an important role after certain things have happened, right? And I would say that's very important for designers, like young designers or new designers. When I say young, not necessarily age, but in tenure as well, to understand that there are certain things where you have to own up yourself as a professional, as a practitioner, and there are certain things where you have to understand that business requires it first, rather than making things perfect all the time.
Okay, so let's kind of unpack that, right? When you said, but we need to business requires it first, right? Other than and then just putting our needs as designers or our hero complex as designers. How if let's say for example, I wanna sell an idea like maybe as a UX designer, I want to say, hey, I think we should improve our application sign up
Mm.
for
Yeah.
for loans, for example, in a bank, right? Like I think that we should persuade the stakeholders to pay attention to that. How would you approach it, or how would you teach your team to approach that? Yeah.
I think it's a great question. One is that we kind of just kind of taking a step back on thinking back. I would say it's important for us to know our users. And when I say users, there's two sides of the coin. There's users that are consuming the product or services that you're giving. There are users that are building a business through this product or services that has been done, right? And understanding the users from the outside, like those that are paying and subscribing, is very important. The pain points, what are the goals in using your product or services or company, as well as what is the situation that they're in, the context that they're in as well, right? So similar to the other side, there's the context of the business. Why are we doing this? Why is it important for us to increase more loan application, right? Who would it impact internally? What processes will it impact, right? And then what's the timeline to do so? Because there'll be costs and resources that's required to build this. Now, there's also a different part whereby corporation and startups, right? So there's a lot of designers that will jump from like startup world to corporation world and hoping that 3 months means 3 months, whereby in a corporate world, 3 months means 6, 9, 8, and so forth, right? Because of all the red tapes and the policies that it held and so forth, and governed by regulators and whatnot, right? And these are all very important red tapes. And yes, designers, we hate red tapes, or a lot of people hate red tapes, but these are necessary because, especially for a financial institution, where we're by taking care of the people's money, right? So there's some form of check and balance that needs to happen there. Now, taking check and balance out, there's the story of solving the problem of the user, right? Which then the best way to pack it is that understand internally what the company is trying to solve, build the story based on data collected from the outside, package it into a 10-pager, and start off with, this is the problem statement, right? These are the facts that we've gotten out. These are the kind of solutions. Now we're recommending A and B, right? Because A has this, pros and cons. B has this, pros and cons. Dear leader, stakeholder, decision maker, we recommend A, but there is also B. All right, now you decide.
I love that. I mean, thank you for breaking it down for us. And I definitely can recognize the entire storytelling framework over there. Do you sort of like, tailor or tweak your presentation or your pitch depending on the crowd in that you're presenting to, right? Like, let's say whether it's a C-suite or whether it's like all the middle managers, like, yeah, like how would you do it differently?
Definitely. I mean, let's say for the team that we work with, right? On a team level, there's a lot of intricate discussions, like user flow, positioning, using our systems, technology, user testing results, user research results, and all those stuff, right? So that's the base of the pyramid. And then as we go into peer level discussion, right? Which is, it could be cross kind of departments, or cross departments within an organization. Then you will need to kind of like package it into how would it impact based on the strategy that the organization is going through. These are the 5 levers that the organization is looking at. Can we then bring down each and one of them and talk about cross resources that's required, timeline, approvals, and all the stuff? And that will be in the middle part. And then the top part, right, which is very important. Other people think it's like, yeah, but the CEO should know all this stuff, or the C-level should understand what we're trying to do. They have other things to do as well, right? They're running an organization, and we're part of that organization. So let's make the information easy enough for them to digest and make decisions. So when you go up to the decision level, it's always about like, these are the findings that we have, these are the options, this is our recommendation, right? And then the discussion, we go like, oh, tell me a bit more about your recommendation and why is it so, rather than targeting the work that's been done, which is the base of the pyramid. And it will just waste so much time because, look, these guys here, these are professionals. So we should trust this, right? And not argue about what's going on here, but argue about what do we need to do next.
Yeah, I think that's such a great way that you put it in such a clear manner, like, pitching to the top versus pitching to the middle versus pitching to the bottom. I really, really like that. And I'm just wondering, as you're sort of like tailoring that, right, to each and every audience, are there things that you don't do, right? For example, if, like, let's say you're talking to people at the top, are there things that you avoid doing? Or if it's like people at your peer level, since you're a design leader, are there things that you avoid doing?
To be honest, I avoid getting into arguments that leads to nowhere to to some extent, right? It's like, whether you're having a Fuji apple or Washington apple, right? I'd rather just go look for, like, we need to work on this apple, regardless of what it is, I try to avoid uh, having like silo conversations, or trying to break it down like, this is my work with my team and my people in my department, and focus on being like, look, as an organization, this is what we need to do, and let's discuss on what we need to do together rather than separately, because at the end of it, as peers, we are working for this organization, and we're trying to deliver value for our users as well as our stakeholders.
Mm. I really like that approach of like keeping the goal in mind and keeping the organization levers in mind, as you mentioned. Now, what if I'm a designer and I'm kind of like new to this, right? Maybe I'm a new design manager, maybe I'm a new design leader. I don't, and maybe I'm new to banking, right? I don't actually really understand what are the levers that drive this business. Any tips how I should find out the answer to that question?
Investopedia would be the best place for you to go and just dive in and really learn about this business model. I think business modeling is a designer's secret weapon, to be honest. Like if you understand the business model of the organization that you're working with, it helps you to kind of sharpen the conversation that you need to have, right, with your product owners, with your technologists, with anyone else outside of the organization. And it would also kind of help you to concentrate on designing better, because you're not getting someone who all of a sudden wakes up the next morning and say like, yeah, this button needs to be red. Right. And you're like, no, but we've done our user studies, we've done this. It's like, yeah, but you know, I'm a hippo and it needs to be red. And there goes your morale, right? Whereby if it goes like, oh, red, that's interesting, right? Now, if we were to take red and maybe look at, um, the word that's in the button, whether it's to proceed or to cancel, would red be the best for this? And then the discussion goes forward, right? Rather than just getting stuck in the middle or goes backward. I think that's an important skill to have.
Yeah. I think you brought up a very good point where people still misunderstand the value of design in many organizations. And it continues to be a challenge for design leaders like yourself to help, some would say evangelize design or to help others understand the possibilities of design. I'm just wondering what's your approach to this, right? Because well, some banks are more mature in this thinking versus others, but um, I've I know some design leaders actually struggle to help their stakeholders understand, like, hey, guys, we're not just here to change colors of buttons. We're not just here to restyle things, right? Like, how's your approach to helping your stakeholders see the value of design?
It's not an overnight success for sure. Right? It takes like phases of, it also depends on the stakeholder, where this person's at, what kind of thinking they're at, and you have to kind of adjust the lingo that you use with the stakeholder, right? But in general, or in the bigger picture, it's about advancing design's influences or ability to contribute, right? And in order to advance the contribution of design in an organization, I would say, is to really position it as basic as possible, right? When you enter into a conversation, it's like, um, when this person's level or the stakeholders level, this product owner, whoever it is stuck at UI phase. And then, okay, we'll talk about UI until the kingdom come. But then we have to translate that into timelines, into successful conversions and all those stuff, which then the conversation goes like, okay, fine, if you want it this way around, we can test this. Right? Well, let's put it into a cycle of, let's say, up to n equals to 1,000 clicks, and we separate this into an A/B testing and see how it goes. And if it's not on live and it's something on paper or on early stage, then we'll go like, fine, we'll test this out, get the person involved, right? Bring them into the work and work with them together instead of trying to push them apart, bring them closer. Because from what happens then, us as designers, we get to learn what they're thinking and why are they approaching certain things a different way. And for them, it gives an opportunity to really understand what design is. I used to have the stakeholder who thinks design is just a one-person team, right? But then as I get this person involved a lot more, they start to understand like, oh, it's actually a 7-man job to get to where we need to be, right? And that's kind of like, it blows their mind with the details and all the information. And the 7 men is like probably 2 UI designers, 3 researchers, and then maybe like 2 design thinkers and whatever it is, and myself going out, finding information, testing it, trying out again, and then turning it into requirements, turning it into a whole flow, testing out the flow and whatnot. So I think, to cut it short, is get them into the process of making the sausage and work together with them because we need to learn what's going on their end as well, right? And they need to learn what's going on our end, and the best way is to collaborate.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to what you're sharing because especially for larger organizations, it's always very siloed. And I really like your approach whereby you try and break down the silos, you try to get people focused on the objective and the goals. You try to get people involved in the design process as well. So this is really, really wonderful. How do you excite them though? Like let's say they're not very excited, like they're like design mad. you know how do you kind of like excite them? I remember that in one of the dinner conversation you said something about like volunteering your team for like some site event or something, and then like we'll do that. So yeah, like feel free to bring in some examples.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great one, because in different parts of, as a venture builder, exciting the customer with design on helping them to build their solution, and then as a consultant, exciting the C levels to kind of like see the future of things. And then now in a financial institution is to excite the organization in embracing a lot more customer centricity. It all has like different views and ways to do it, but I would say it's storytelling, right? It's storytelling and breaking it down into something that we can relate, instead of talking about like design jargon, or banking jargon, or whatever jargon it is. I remember this one story. I remember it was pre-acquisition. I was working with this company. We were servicing them in Indonesia, and then one of the design VPs were arguing with me. It's like, hey, you know what? This design needs to be this way around. It needs to change, and it needs to change, and it needs to change. And it's like, great, I hear you, but how can we do this together, right? No, you need to do this because you're the vendor and blah blah blah. I hear you. I am the vendor, but I feel that I can contribute more if we work together, right? So it was more of changing this whole energy of, instead of just you do what you need to do, to let us do it together so that we can achieve a better result, right? So, and then that kind of gives co-ownership to the design, right? We as design experts comes with the expertise of the know-how, and they as a business expert with their business know-how. But when we come together, it is just solving the problems for the users, and that's what excites them, right? It's like, wow, especially bringing them into all the user interviews, right? User testings. Sometimes if they're not able to go to user testings, we'll record video and audio and then play it in a meeting, and then just show like, this is the readout of our study, and this is what you can see. And instead of me having to tell them this is what the user says, I go like, let's listen to what the user says. Click. And the power is just, it's crazy, It's really crazy.
That's a really excellent reminder that our responsibility is to bring the voice of the customer into the rooms where decisions are made, right? So I think that's really great
Yeah, because
that you mentioned that.
we are not the customers, right? And this is the mistakes that designers keep on doing. They go like, putting the head of the customer, I am now this, this, this. It's like, no, we can't do that because it's biasness, right? Yes, we can start having assumptions of what the customer is thinking about, but listening to the customer and bringing that insights into a room full of execs that have not really talked to the customers, that's the biggest impact that you can get as a designer, I would say.
Yeah, that's an excellent reminder. And I'm not sure if you want to share this case study, but I kind of recall very vaguely that you volunteer yourself for like side projects
Oh, yes,
in
yes, of
in an
course.
organization as well, and you kind of use that as an opportunity to contribute your perspective as a design leader to also share what's the value of design. Like would you encourage other design leaders to do that, like volunteer their time
Mm.
to add value to the organization? And I'm just curious, like why would you do that? Like I mean, we're all so busy and we're we're really like trying to deliver work already. Like yeah, like I'm kind of curious, like what's the thinking behind it?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry that I missed out that one, but um I think it's very important for design leaders to actually build relationship outside of just design and the work environment, like your direct 2 degrees of people that you work with, and go further, because you'll never know who's going to advocate you in a room of amber heated discussion with execs, right? And the only way for you to do that is to reach out and go like, hey, you know what? This sounds interesting. I would like to help out. And again, because designers' jobs, like for us, is to bring a different perspective. That's our job, right? And hence bringing the voice of the customer, asking the question, being the 13th man on the table, and always saying no, maybe, whatnot. It brings value to other things. Let's say, I volunteer my designers for the quarterly newsletter. Why is that? Because the newsletter is being done by other people within the organization, but for them to then work with the designer and then experience the work with the designer, they're just going to go like, wow, I would love to have this in my project. How do I engage you guys? Right. And, or let's say it has something to do with, an organization-wide event, right? And just put in a couple of designers in there, and they start doing the design thinking, they run their workshops, and then they go like, you know what? I've been stuck with this thing. I would love to get your point of view. And this, can you help us? And all this stuff will just like indirectly bring back to design work, because value begets value, right? Whatever value that you give out, however small it is, it will come back to you, however big it needs to be.
I love that approach, and it's such a I would say it's such a long term way to think about building relationships. It's such a long term way to think about like building your team as well. Uh, and it's interesting to see like that you also get your team involved in this process. It's not just yourself that you're trying to manage up or manage sideways across the organization, and they get to see like your team in action. Well, what have you noticed? I mean, you probably done this for a year or two or more, or even more right now. Like, what do you start to notice when people or stakeholders are interacting with you or your team members? Now that you have done some of these, I would say, goodwill projects.
Oh, you start to see a lot more openness in the conversation, right? Because, like again, it's being a design leader is not just being a leader of one, right? It's actually a representation of a leader of many, right? I, as the head of design, not necessarily am the only head, but I'm with other heads as well, right? And they have their approaches, their ability, their spikes, and whatever value that they bring, right? And when these guys are having their conversations on the side, they are providing that value. But when the conversation comes back to me, then I can bring the collective value of it, right? Whether, one part is visual design, one part is design studio, which is running a lot of design thinking workshops, right? User research and insights, reports and whatnot. But when we come together, it becomes this amazing human-centered value that the business goes like, oh, I didn't realize we have this in our organization. I thought you just do UI, Oh, I thought you just do this. Oh, I've seen you guys in workshops. You guys ran good workshops. I didn't know that you can actually help for us to think through our business model and stuff like that. So it's positive, to be very frank, and it gives a lot of discussion, sometimes too much to some extent. Resource and ask is high and low, but even when that happens, I know people say like you have to say no in order for you to grow. For me, it's like, no, I want to say yes, but I'll phase out when the yes comes, right? Because the conversation needs to be built until it's ready to launch.
Yeah. I think this is such a excellent reminder, especially in a time and period where we see a lot of tech layoffs, right? And a ton of people who get affected by these tech layoffs are actually like product designers, product managers, where people think, hey, like the value of a design team is like to innovate only, right? But you just reminded me that, hey, actually, that's not the only value that a design team can bring. But we bring more perspective, we bring the big picture perspective, we challenge the way people think about their problems as well. So I think that's such a excellent reminder and such a difficult time in the job market at the moment. And I'm just wondering, as you're leading your team, you know, like as a design leader, one of the common pressures is like protecting your team, or even uh, making sure that your team doesn't get distracted. Right. So I'm just wondering, how do you manage upwards in a corporate environment?
Oh wow. Yeah, this is something that I had to learn in many ways. Easy, hard, and everything in between. Coming from, I think my first upwards management was when I was in McKinsey, to be honest. Post-acquisition, because prior to that, yes, I was working as a product designer and I started off my company, and I was so used to running things for about close to 5 years. And then it comes to corporate world, is really upwards management, right, which is very key. And there's two ways to go about it, I would say. One is to push yourself as the person that solves everything, which it's always the way to do. Or the other one is to bring others along, which is the hardest way to do. But my game has always been a long-term game. It's always been about like, yeah, sure. I mean, I would love this to happen now, but I'm trying to build a sustainable design team that at the end of it, business will always have a perspective to gain from the customers. And to do so is really to empower other people to represent you and then hit that 10,000 hours of leadership, right? So they have the 10,000 hours of doing the work, 10,000 hours of running meetings, 10,000 hours of presentation, and 10,000 hours of leadership, which then for the majority of the time of 10,000 hours is failure and how you bounce back from failure. And as a design leader that lets other design seniors to move forward, I have to be ready to catch when failure comes. Right? I have to set up this safe environment where if you fall when you're close to the sun, there is actually a net for you to fall on. It's slightly below. It gives you a bit more jittery feeling when you're falling down. It's like, oh no, I've done something wrong. This is gonna, screw me up. And then you're like, oh, hang on, I'm a bit safe, but I've learned my lesson. That's an important thing, right? And yeah, and it's continuous supporting, right? Because as a design leader, I can't just do everything myself, and I don't have enough hours to do so. And what's the use of having a team if I cannot trust them, right? So my base of hiring is like, you're in my team because I trust you, right? Trust comes first, skills come second, right? Because I know for sure I can help you with your skills, or I can hire you because you're young enough to build the skills in terms of tenure, right? But this trust here is something that we as a team needs to uphold, because without trust, nothing's going to glue us together to achieve a bigger goal.
Yeah. And I believe that approach is really, really, really challenging because it takes a lot of energy to support people and to lift them up and to coach them and to mentor them as well. Um, I like with a very busy schedule yourself, how do you manage that, right? Like, do you have any tips for other design leaders on how they can be more effective at that? Yeah.
Yeah, so right now I have a team of probably 20 odd designers. And it's still fairly small to some, fairly large to some, but I try to get to know them um, as deep as I can, right? Like what's the core value of this person? What drives them on a daily basis? What's the biggest achievement that they want to get in life? What is the lowest point in life? Because understanding them as a person from what I've gained so far helps me to then also understand them as a professional. And I will also be open about myself. Like, these are my cuts and bruises, and these are the trophies. Get to know me so that I can get to know you, and we can, build this amazing journey together. I think that's the thing. It's like you're playing RPG, and you need your tank, and you need your wizard, and you need your healer, and you need to trust these guys, right? If you're the tank, then you need to trust the healer to know when to heal you, when the time comes, right? And you need to know like someone from the back to volley a fireball just in case you missed out a few inches or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. I love that analogy as a fellow gamer. So plus one to that. Um, yeah. So yeah, I mean that makes perfect sense. And as you're doing that, right, as you're kind of building your team up, making sure that it's sustainable, um, I'm just kind of wondering, there are a lot of new talent coming into our industry, right? So there's a lot of new blood. There's a lot of people who are new. There's a lot of people who are new to the banking sector, for example, right? You can't exactly get a talent
Oh
from
yeah.
another bank. You may not want to either. So what are your approaches to um, kind of grooming new talent, right? And how do you make that sustainable?
Mm. Well, I'm snickering because I only believe in one way, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people would disagree with this. It is just send them into the deep end and get ready to dive in when the time comes, right? Because really, there's no other way but experiencing it yourself, like having that battle scar of like, wow, I was just a bit too cocky just now with my design, and now it comes back with tenfold of work to do, um, which you have to go through, right? Especially for new designers, because again, there's this whole saving the world complex that can happen as a new designer. I was there myself, and saving the world requires a whole team, right? It's not just one person. And knowing that sometimes your perfect design cannot be executed now, but if you phase it out, you can achieve it, right? Ego management is also very important. And every now and then I'll have to do an ego check to all the young ones. And they will do ego check on me as well, right? It's like, yeah, Izwan, but I'm a lot better designer than you. It's like, that's the whole idea. The whole idea is for you to be a better designer than I am, than I ever was, right? I'm here because, to be very frank, I don't do UI work as much as I used to, but I'm here to set the stage for you to do your greatest work and to explain to you what business is. That's it. That's my job. Because if I can do your work, I don't need you. And if you can do my work, you don't need me. But we're here because we need each other and we need to build this together.
I feel like I'm getting a pep talk over there, but so it's
Go
good.
team.
It's good. It's good. Yeah, but ego is one thing we all have to manage. Whether we're a professional, whether we work for ourselves, whether we work in a team and all that. And sometimes egos get the better of us, right? Sometimes we might be a little bit stubborn to change, right? The criticism might be harsh, the work um might feel a little bit too dreadful, and people start to resist your best advice. People start to
Mm.
resist what you tell them. And they might say, hey, this one, I don't think this is for me, man. How like what then comes to your mind as you're trying to retain talent, or you're trying to kind of like coach them, or maybe you don't you will just like let this one go. I don't know. What's your approach to
Yeah,
that?
that's a great one. That's a great one. I think being a hiring manager for such a long time, um, nothing keeps a team together better than principles, right? If you have principles, the team will believe in the principles, right? They don't have to believe in the leader, but the leader needs to uphold the principles, right? That is very important. And my team has been doing really well for the past 3.5 years or 4 years, and we're on our fifth year. We're so good at doing the work, turning things around and whatnot. But then we start to realize that we also need to take time to do our work, right? Because amazing stuff comes with taking time. So we ended up coining this term where it's like, we need to start to love design. And what does it mean? We need to start to love what we do. We need to love the people that we work with. And we need to love the hardship and the environment that we're in so that we can just love what we do. right? So that's kind of this new thing that we're exploring is like let's love design and see where this goes, right? If you want to be the best in the world, of course there's always the best in the world team out there. I mean we're a team from Malaysia that nobody has really heard of, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't give our all. And this is something that we're working on, right? We're working to love design more, and hopefully this principle will keep the team together and keep everyone accountable with the work that they do.
Yeah. It as you're sharing that, it kind of reminds me of the philosophy of stoicism, right? Like no matter how tough the environment is, it's like you try and make the best out of it, and you just keep doing the work, you put in the effort, and
Mm.
you just go through it with it.
Yeah,
And that's
value.
that's
Right.
that is such a great approach. I'm wondering, like, are there other things that you do in your team that helps to build a great culture within your team? Because you mentioned something about, it's all about trust, right? So how do you foster trust? How do you build a great culture in the design team?
But I don't know if I've built a great culture, to be honest, but I'm building a culture for sure. Building trust is the toughest thing because I need to learn to let go, right? And learning to let go is also the hardest because mistakes will happen and I'm fully accountable for the mistakes. So if I were to send someone junior and then unprepared, I'll just be getting text messages from stakeholders and saying like, what's going on here? Can you please do this? And I have to take that input in, right? But I can't just turn around and just dump it onto this person that I'm trying to build up. So I need to then dissect this input, tell this talent, like, look, this is what's happening. These are the things that triggered it. So we need to kind of like take steps to nurture and make it happen. And if let's say this talent is facing something really hard, I say it's okay, take a step back. I'll come in and help you out, or I'll put in a senior in front of you, but only for a short amount of time. And we have to step out because we need you to grow, right? And it's like this whole analogy of keeping the forest alive, right? You have your canopy trees, you have your shrubs, and you have all this goodness from the fruit and all the seeds that's been planted onto the ground. When the time comes, that canopy tree needs to move aside in order for this other tree to just come up and be the canopy, right? So my job is as long as I'm at this canopy portion, I need to keep whatever safe, but I need to move aside. I need to give enough sunshine to this talent so that they can grow.
I love that analogy, and it kind of reminds me of, like, you almost play like the role of a gardener or someone who's trying to preserve a forest, right?
Mm.
So that's really awesome. And it also reminds me that, the way that you approach this, right, about talent development, uh, building up your talent, building their capabilities, is such a way, like sports coaches do as well, right? Like you've been in the trenches yourself, you've done it yourself, you know what needs to be done, but now you're trying to build your team up, right? So it's kind of like dissecting that. It's coaching, right? It's kind of being
Mm.
a good teacher, it's being a good coach. And I think that's such an important skill as well, for design leaders to apply, as they're working with the team. Um, so as a design leader, right, knowing that you've done the work, knowing that do all you can in setting the stage as you describe it, how do you push yourself to be a better design leader, right? Do you choose to pursue, like, to be better at your craft, or do you kind of explore other areas to grow? Yeah.
Mm. I think that's a great one as well. Um, it all depends, or it for me, for myself, right? Um, I'm heavily inspired by my late father. He was, he built something amazing, and he built it on principles, right? So he's a very principled person. And it's like, even to a point where if you find money on the floor, he's gonna ask you the questions like, are you gonna take it? Are you gonna leave it, or what are you gonna do with it? Right? If you take it, and then he'll ask, is it yours to take? And it just dawns on you, it's like, no, it is not mine. Then what are you gonna do about it? Right? I have to give this to the police station, I have to give it to someone, lost and found or whatever it is, and that kind of like instilled values or at least ideologies onto me. And with that, for me, is really building an economy of designers, or a design economy, right? For Malaysia, at least. And it's important because we're just we're humans, right? No matter how much robots will replace certain things that we do, they're replacing it to help us achieve things better, right? And achieving things better requires us to understand what's next, right? If we have solved the hygiene problems of the world, then what's next? There's always a problem to solve, and there's always an economy to build that will require divergent thinking, right? And this divergent thinking is something that I would love to be a part of and build and instill, into probably a nation like Malaysia. And that's one of the reasons why I founded UX Malaysia as well, was to grow the design community in Malaysia and to showcase that there is an economy to be built, whether you are, a freelancer or a professional. There is always this path and other people that is going through that they can help one another. Yeah.
Great. So it sounds like you're developing yourself more as a ecosystem builder to kind of like make sure that the opportunities are also extended to the entire ecosystem and the entire economy. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned UX Malaysia. I believe it's an organization that's been around for many years as well. What are you observing as you're building this ecosystem? I'm also quite well aware that you're not doing it alone. You have partners involved.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you observing as you're building this ecosystem for the last couple of years? Yeah.
Yeah, so funny enough, there is a conference coming up, and the conference, um, uh, not host, but the guy that's running the conference has told me, say, hey, Izwan, UX Malaysia has just reached 11 years. And I was shocked. I was like, hang on, 11 years? We've been around for 11 years? That's crazy, right? I remember starting it off, I think it was 2014, 2013. We ran our first conference, and then the next year we ran another conference. I was probably a 25-year-old, 26, 27-year-old kid, wanting to build something, with that intention of like, there is something here. If no one's going to do it, I'll do it, right? Of course, there were other splinter cells that were working around, which was great. And then we all came together under the roof of UX Nation, pushed it up. It has come a long way. It has come from a handful of like professionals or top talents into like probably a bucket full of them now, right? And you're seeing like a lot of Malaysians being exported out, right? Into Atlassian, into Meta, into Google, into wherever, Tesla, whatever it is. Like these guys are just boom. They go out of Malaysia and they contribute into all these other innovations. And I'm like, this needs to be shown more, and this needs to be kind of like permeated more into the ecosystem. And I'm seeing a lot of design job posts opening up in corporations, right? I'm seeing a lot more senior titles popping up. Head of design is no longer just a dream, right? Head of design is actually part of multiple organizations within the region. And I'm so encouraged with the growth that I'm seeing. And I feel that it will just it has its mind of its own now. It's just going and growing on its own. Yeah, which kind of touches a bit more into the soul right now. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
growth. I see growth. Yeah.
And I would like to say like congratulations on shepherding this community for more than 10 years.
Thank you.
It's yeah, I know it's a very tough endeavor having been a community builder myself. And I believe that the impact is it's not something that you can like quantify in terms of economic or monetary value. There might be a lot of intangible impacts, people you've affected in different ways as you go along in this journey. So what's next for you right, as a design leader? What's next for UX Malaysia?
Wow, this question is it's one of the toughest questions.
Yeah,
And
we ask a lot of deep questions here.
and even for me, I've always been asking myself, what's next? Do I go back into entrepreneurship, or do I, you know, jump into another vertical and so forth? But I think for the near future, there's a lot of work to be done here in the financial industry. Finances is kind of what makes the world goes round to some extent. And we're building a lot of ESG products, and we are talking to a lot more to our customers. And I think there's still a lot more to be done here. And I feel in the near future, I'll still stick around. But of course, you'll never know. You know, life is life, and the river of life takes you where it needs to take you, right?
Yes, and I hope the river of life take you to great oceans and great places, so
Yeah.
that you can affect more
For
people.
us all.
For us. So, that's really wonderful. And well, if I'm a new design manager, right, or I'm just kind of like starting my role as a design leader, what tips or what advice would you give me?
I think number one, find a cohort, whether it's internal within an organization or just within a community. I would say embed yourself in a community. I think make friends is very important because you're not able to learn everything in one place, but you can learn from stories and you can learn from other people's experiences. Have a toolkit, right? As a design leader, manager, senior, have your toolkit ready. What's a toolkit? Things that you're good at, things that you think, you know, I am a design researcher, right? You know, an example. I have done probably good in-depth interviews, and I've done a set of focus groups, and I've done a set of surveys, but I have not done journal studies. I've not done, you know, fly on the wall observations and all those stuff, in which I need to probably start doing so. But you see, having a toolkit will then make you understand that as a designer in general, there is no linear growth, but is a radial growth, right? Radial towards like I am more of a UI than a researcher, but I have an ability to do research to inform my UI decisions, right? Or I am more of a UI, but close to technology and systems. So I have a lot more on the systems and technology portion. Hence, I am great at design systems. I am more of, you know, a generalist, but with an ability to communicate towards stakeholders, right? I will then position as an evangelist or someone that runs workshops, a design thinker, or part of a design studio or design strategy, right? So understanding your radial growth or your toolkit will kind of position you best on which part of design. Because to be honest, design is just, it's not like design how it was before. Digital design has been broken into multiple facets of it, and each of them has its own depth of expertise for you to grow into.
Yeah. So find your tribe. That's your advice, and also consider what you're good at and where you need to grow. And of course, maybe learn from others who might be experts in their own areas and on their own sectors.
And
Really
don't
wonderful. Yeah,
to
go
get
ahead.
feedback from your boss, right? I think that's one thing. Is like I have a lot of juniors that are afraid to talk to me, but I try and engage them as much as I can because that that kind of like skip level feedback is so important. It helps you to mature faster, and it makes you understand like there is a quantum of effort that needs to be done from junior, mid, senior, lead, you know, chief, and whatever it is. There's a quantum. It's not a single step at a time. It's probably multiple steps to get there.
Yeah, that's really good advice as well. And I just want to share with the audience this particular podcast episode has been quite several months in the making. I think Izwan and I have talked about the possibilities of doing it, but because of the schedules and all that, it was really hard to nail a time. But I'm so glad we were able to come down and have a chat today, and I'm glad that we capture quite a good portion of your thinking today on a very specific topic of communicating impact as a design leader. So thank you for sharing your thoughts with all of us here today. And how can people reach out to you if they have more questions or if they want to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy that we got here. Dylan, thank you so much for setting this up, taking time, changing time. I really appreciate it. I'm so happy that I'm able to share my thoughts as well, and I hope it brings value to anyone out there listening. And if it doesn't, I'm happy to receive feedback as well, because I too am still learning. You can reach me out on LinkedIn, Izwan Ismail. Just look it up and message me there, and then we can be friends. It's fine.
Awesome. So, Izwan, it's been a pleasure talking to you this evening. And for the rest of you who is joining us as a live audience, if you got any further questions for Izwan, feel free to let him know over LinkedIn and feel free to connect with him or myself over LinkedIn. Do follow us on our YouTube channel as well as on the different podcast channels if you're listening to this episode on podcasts. And we'll catch you again next month in Working in UX Design. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.